The Ark, also known as Our Place Fellowship, is a small-town church in Colville, Washington, located about miles south of the US-Canadian border. It attracted many twisted people in the 80s and made children into the most brutal serial killers and terrorists. Hi, I'm Alice, and be ready, cause the shit's about to get spooky. Today I'll be talking about an evil, racist, anti-Semitic, white supremacist church, the Ark. But first, for those of you who live under a rock, I'll explain what cult means. A cult is a group of organized followers who have unusual religious or spiritual beliefs. Some cults live in isolation from the rest of the society. Some live among us. Some cults have a leader, some of them don't, so that's a bit tricky. But all of them have at least one thing in common. In every cult, all the followers are under psychological manipulation, which means their behavior, actions, their beliefs, everything is controlled. I've deep dived into cults before, and I've recently discovered an evil Russian cult, which I've talked about in my previous video, so check that out as well. But now, let's get back to the Ark. The Ark Church was founded in 1975 in the city of Colville, Washington, and preached Christian identity beliefs. Christian identity is a movement that peaked in the 80s and 90s and basically says that all white people, specifically Anglo-Saxons and Germans, are the descendants of the lost tribes of Israel, meaning they came from Jesus, and everyone who's not white, they did not come from Jesus and they're not pure, and Jews, they're just based. They're bad and came from Satan. Everyone who's not pure, they are gonna be killed soon or enslaved. So that's some kind of a prophecy for them. And to manifest this prophecy, as obviously they like the sound of it, they committed crimes like terrorism and murder. Christian identity is just a bunch of hate groups that are spread all over the United States. You can find in jails, actually. Which brings me on to a second part. The first infamous killer is Israel Keys, or the Murder Kit Killer. He was an American serial killer, bank robber, arsonist, terrorist, rapist, and necrophiliac, with a body count of 11 plus people. He admired Ted Bundy, who was another serial killer, who murdered more than 30 young women in very sadistic and twisted ways. Israel put together murder kits, consisting of guns, disguises, disposable cell phones, cash, and everything else that he considered useful to commit crimes. Israel Keys was the second of 10 children born to Heidi and John Jeffrey Keys on January 7, 1978, in Cove, Utah. The Keys family did not believe in government interference, public schools, and modern medicine, so to pursue their own way of life, in 1983, they moved to Colville, where their family lived completely off the grid for years before they built a cabin. Their cabin had one room, no heating, no electricity, no running water, but they loved it. Colville was a really beautiful, isolated, and peaceful place where the Keys hunted for food and attended services in a local church, which was called the Ark. And I can only assume how this church/hate group messed up these kids. While in Washington, Israel Keys was already committing crimes, like robbing his neighbors and stealing their guns to sell them later, and he also skinned animals alive, which is a very concerning hobby. If you have a child who skins animals alive, that's a big red flag. So all of what he'd done shows perfectly that he'd already lacked empathy at such a young age. And that's where I'll stop and make a quick rundown on everything that happened years later at the end of Israel Keys' life. On March 13th, 2012, Israel Keys was pulled over by the police and finally arrested. He then confessed of murdering Lorraine and Bill Correa and Samantha Koenig, and many other people whose names he did not care to mention. On the morning of December 2nd, 2012, Israel Keys took his own life in a prison cell, taking all the untold murder cases to his grave. Israel Case did not have a pattern to his murders. He killed people just because they were at a wrong place at a wrong time. It doesn't justify what he did in any way, shape, or form. He was an evil person, but how did he come to this? This normalization of hatred towards other human beings that the Christian identity and the Ark preach really constituted Israel's upbringing and the upbringing of all the children that were involved. These hate groups create twisted people who have no remorse and that do heinous things, and it's understandable why most of them end up in jails. The second infamous killer is Shavi Kehoe. Shavi is an American convicted murderer who's currently serving 3 consecutive life sentences for the kidnapping, torture, and murder of William and Nancy Miller and their 8-year-old daughter Sarah. Their bodies were found handcuffed in a lake. Shavi is the oldest of 8 sons born to Kirby and Gloria Kehoe on January 29, 1973 in Orange Park, Florida. When Shavi was 12 years old, the Kehoe family moved to Colville, where they lived in a cabin, and just the Keys family, they had no electricity, no running water. They were completely isolated from everyone. They were surrounded by woodland and nature on the one side, and by evil cult on another. Actually, there were 2 evil cults, the Ark and Aryan nations. Aryan nations is once again just a racist, anti-Semitic, white supremacist hate group / cult. Well, you can imagine how it affected Shavi and his brother Shane, who was Shavi's partner in crime for a while. Even at home, they were taught white supremacy by their father, so there was no way they could avoid or escape these ideas. Children were brought up in violence and harsh discipline, and that's what made them who they are. At only 12 years old, Shavi heard about Bob Matthews, who maybe you've heard of as well, because he was the leader of the group called The Order, which is another white supremacist group, hate group. So apparently Shavi got a lot of inspiration from this man, because he was involved in armed robberies, burglaries, and shootouts, just like Bob Matthews. He also created a terrorist group called the Aryan People's Republic. So he clearly wanted to follow in Bob's footsteps. Not the greatest footsteps. Fortunately for us and unfortunately for Shavi, he was turned in by his brother and put in jail in 1999. Now, before I started my research, I was mainly curious about the Ark, about people who attended this church and what beliefs they had, and this is what I tried to focus on. But halfway through I realized that the Ark is just a small part of a much bigger, much scarier cult. So comment down below what your thoughts are about this cult / cults, and I hope to see you on another scary ride. Now cheers!